Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hi, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Matthew FitzSimmons, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yes, you are. It's Friday. You know, it's funny, Matthew, and I think you'll appreciate this. A while back, I was doing 5 episodes a week for a long time, 5 live episodes. Wow. Because I wanted people to say, wow. I wanted to stand out. Rogan does 5. Rogan's got a crew, by the way. I've got a very, very small thing. But I'm like, look, how do you stand out out of a million bazillion podcasts? And I'm like, I'm just going to out-fucking work everybody. I'm just going to outwork. I'm going to get badass guests like Matt FitzSimmons on my show and just continue to just stack opportunity, right? And that helps stand out in a world of a million podcasts. And I'm saying a million, but that's legitimately what you're competing in. And as I think about this, I look at your stack of books, and there are a million authors. So, you know, you can't write 5 books a week, but you can be prolific. Is that part of your approach?
I don't know. It's an interesting push-pull. So, you know, since I started, I'm essentially on a book a year. Which, you know, the nice part of that is, you know, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Are we?
Here, I'll mute my mic.
Okay. Sorry. You know, being on a book a year cadence, I picked up that like publishing lingo. Writing a book a year. Let's just actually use the English language as it was intended. Writing a book a year is where they like you for mystery thriller, you know, genre writers. And there's that, like, you know, there's what's like art and commerce. If I don't turn in a book, I don't get paid. And there's also the risk that if you don't get a book out every year, that readers will forget about you and move. You know, it's you know, there's a very, very thin crust. You know, someone said, a friend of mine, when I like wrote my first book, they were like, "You're famous." And I'm like, no, there's no such thing as author famous. And they're like, "Sure there is." I'm like, "Really? How many authors would you recognize walking down the street?" Yeah. I'll wait.
Yeah.
Wait. How many? Name 3.
I mean, Tom Clancy, because he'd be a corpse. That corpse is Tom Clancy.
That is Tom Clancy. But I mean, you're really like, I would recognize Stephen King. I mean, apart from the authors I know personally, but like most people, you know, Stephen King might be recognizable. J.K. Rowling. I don't know if I'd recognize J.K. Rowling just walking down the street.
I have no idea what she looks like. Right. I know she's a nice lady, and that's about it.
I know. I think R.R. Martin, because R.R. Martin is smart because he always wears the same outfit. He's got his little hat. He's got his suspenders. But like authors just aren't famous in that way for the most part. And you know, there's that, you know, once you get out of that very, very thin band, you know, there's like you were saying, like there are a million authors. There's a million books coming out. And with self-publishing, that it's even more. And it's difficult. You know, there's this constant fear of like, I'm just going to be forgotten if I don't get that next book out.
You know, we've had Craig Johnson on the show. He wrote the Longmire series, but he's not the guy that's famous for that. You know, it's like he wrote this incredible thing. If he was alive, I couldn't pick Louis L'Amour out of a crowd. Even if you showed me a picture of him now, I'd be like, is that some dead Western guy? I don't know, you know. And Craig Johnson's got a thing. He wears his hat. He's a rancher from Wyoming. Unless you know what he looks like and you go to the conventions that he goes to, you're right. It's hard for an author, and maybe that's by design. Are you guys introverted? Do introverts self-select into mass book writing things?
I think to an extent, but just because it's by nature, you spend 364 days a year alone. You're opting to spend a good amount of your time. You know, it's that interesting thing is like you're writing whatever you're writing trying to reflect the world out there. But in order to do that, you have to go retreat to your, and work alone for large portions of the time. And then one day a year, they let us out on publication day, and it's like zoo day, and they're like, and the author's like, I'm alive, and then they go, no, get back in your cave.
I'm alive.
Get back to, exactly. No, I'm still here. Let me out.
Yeah.
But I think it's changed a lot. I mean, if you go back to like the 50s and 60s, you look at you look at the old talk shows. Authors were on talk shows. You'd have Tom Wolfe and Truman Capote and Gore Vidal and those guys. They were regular, popular guests on talk shows. And now really it's just a parade of actors. Like the acting is really the only arts profession that really gets art, I guess, acting and musicians. Those are the only two arts that America really has time to attach to. And for if you're a dancer or you're a writer or you're what have you, you're essentially anonymous.
Yeah.
Which is just the nature of the beast.
I mean, like right now, you think about, okay, I mean someone who's a dancer, like that is the way they got famous. Gregory Hines is dead. Is Mikhail Baryshnikov, is he alive still? Maybe.
He's alive. I
wouldn't recognize him walking down the street. And I'm running out of people that I can say that are known for dancing. Yes, Jennifer Lopez emerged as a dancer, but I think she's something other than a dancer at this point.
Right. Channing Tatum.
Right. These are guys, but
they've generally transitioned to something else.
Right.
They're not famous, they're not widely famous for dancing.
Right.
They're dancers who then have added a hyphenate to what they do. They're dancers/actors, dancers/singers.
Right. Because a song and dance man doesn't really exist in the regular parlance. That's Carol O'Connor. Everybody knows him, or Danny Kaye, or these people that made their money by dancing. And there's plenty of people that make their money dancing and singing, but you don't think of Justin Timberlake as a song and dance man. You think of him as, I don't know, a pop star or something like that.
Pop star and an actor at this point.
That's interesting, man. I love that we kind of got off going in that direction. I want to really quick push everybody to Matthew's website, MatthewFitzSimmons.com. Pretty simple. And he's written a book. We're going to talk about all that stuff. He's actually written a bunch of books, but I want to kind of stay in this zone here. So his book is called Constance. I'll put a link up here in a sec. I'm curious, when you go to a party and someone's like, so what do? Do you go, oh, I'm an author? Or do you feel bad about it?
I don't feel bad about it. What I realize I do is often say, well, because I live in Washington, D.C., and people go, what do you do? And I'll say, I'm a writer. And that could be a journalist. That could be a nonfiction writer. Like I very rarely actually just lead with, well, I'm an author or a novelist. I'll just, and people are like, what kind of writing do you do? And then I almost grudgingly say, well, I write thrillers. And then they're like, wait, what? That was not the answer they were expecting at all. Particularly in Washington, D.C., like we're not, it's, if I was in New York, you throw a stone and hit a writer. If you're in L.A., throw a stone and hit a writer. There are not a lot of people writing mystery thrillers, fiction. It's not a hotbed of fiction. We're really known for, historical nonfiction writers, political writers, economists, that type of thing. So
it's you're right. In my business, someone says they're an author, I now have to figure out what that means, because maybe they're a technical writer, and maybe they're the most successful technical writer in the world. And if you're in their world, it's like, oh, how do you not know Gabe McKinney? Oh my God. He writes the best manuals in the world. And you're like, I didn't know. I'm sorry. Same thing with actors. Oh, I'm an actor. Okay. What kind of actor? Evil, good, bad, prolific,
successful, paid. There's that other sort of thing, which is like, particularly when you're trying to make it, in your 20s, it's like, can you say that you're the thing that you want to be?
Right.
I think there's also that with like writers. It's like, I hear people say that. It's like, well, I'm not really a writer. I haven't been published. And you say, like, well, are you writing? And they're like, well, yeah. Well, then you're a writer.
Right.
but there is that sort of sense of like, until you get that validation from, or that like proof, like I have written and someone has paid me for my words and published them into the world, that you're not really that thing, that you're just pretend. And I think I think that feels really demoralizing. When you're trying to make it and you're like, I'm an actor. Well, what have you been in? Well, nothing. I just go on a lot of auditions. Well, you're still an actor. You're just, you're grinding. You're grinding it out. You're trying to make it.
Yeah. No, you're making great points. I am an author, a writer of sorts. I'm working on a couple of books. I've got a lot of time in Afghanistan and a lot of like really clear knowledge on that because of my very distinct experience there. And so I write about that, but I also have these incredible encounters with you and the next author and this scientist. And so I try to capture these moments of humanity as best I'm able,
Right.
The thing is because I'm not known in that silo. I have to basically publish on Medium, and I'm not trying to be an author per se. I intend to get my books done. And at that point, I guess I'd be a book author. But it wouldn't be unfair to say Pete's a writer, but he's more of a hobbyist. However, there's this media outlet called the Break It Down Show that always picks up my articles, and so someone picks them up, and so it's a little incestuous. But when you have the excellent ideas about Afghanistan and you can talk circles around most of the people who've never been there, someone has to pick you up so that somebody bigger later on can pick me up. So I submit to the New York Times. They just don't choose to publish my stuff. So there is that hump. So I'm successful in that I'm able to write these things and put these lessons out and hopefully provide something for the greater good through my words. But yeah, am I going to say I'm a writer? Probably not.
I mean, I always point to, I would say you are. I always point to Einstein.
Okay.
Right. Like Einstein famously was working as a patent clerk when he wrote the general theory, the general theory of and the special theory of relativity and a couple of other papers. So he was not a physicist. He was a patent clerk. But you're going to tell me that Albert Einstein wasn't a physicist when he completely reimagined everything we know about the universe while sitting at his desk? He was a physicist. It's like if you're doing the work, if you're putting the time in, that it can't necessarily be an external validation to say that you are the thing that you are. Your work and Kafka never published in his lifetime. For my money, he's one of the 5 most important novelists of the 20th century, but he was never published. So he's a hell of a lot better than I am. He's a hell of a lot more important than I ever will be. But I'm a novelist and he's not. No, sir. No. Like it's, if you're doing the work, you're doing the work.
If you ever want to feel insignificant as a novelist or a writer, you can look up Voltaire's work and you realize, wow, all that guy did was scratch a quill across a paper. Like he never stopped. And you're right. You can measure yourself poorly against that person, but then you look at someone that just smashes a home run with their first book and is way more known, than Voltaire. Who says Voltaire? And I don't know how many years it's been since I said the words Voltaire out loud before, but it's been a long time. But yeah.
But like, you have those people who smash the home run, but like go back. Something that's always interesting to do is think about the best books that were written from like 1920 to 1930. Right. And you've got you got your Fitzgerald, you got your Hemingway, your John Dos Passos. You've got a whole. Right. Now go look at the bestseller lists from 1920 to 1930, and almost none of them are on it. And all the people who are on it, you've never heard of.
Yeah.
And they were huge bestsellers at the time. So bestsellers and like long term, like these are the people who are contributing work that will be remembered and that will stand the test of time. Those are often two very different animals. And that the thing that we like in the moment is not always the thing that we look back on 30 years later and it's like, what was brilliant? Like the Velvet Underground. The Velvet Underground, the band from like 1966 to whenever they broke up in 71, 72, they sold maybe a total, like the Rolling Stones outsold them with one record, everything that they ever did.
Right.
But for the Velvet Underground, basically everyone, like there's a whole like lane of American music that has just been building on what the Velvet Underground did. But it took people a long time to realize that, well, this stuff is just revolutionary.
Yeah.
At the moment, it just wasn't. It wasn't. Sometimes you're ahead of the curve. Sometimes, the ear isn't ready for what it is, and it's like 10 years down the road, and like, ooh, that was the thing. That was the brilliant thing. So
yeah. You made me think about Traffic. When you listen to Traffic, that band,
right? Oh, for sure.
There's other bands like that. When you hear the future in their music, you're like, wait, this is 50 years old. There's no way. And so they had their finger on the pulse of something. And okay, you want a great example of this, and we'll use bands again. Fishbone is the big band of the Chili Peppers. Fishbone always made the artistic choice. Chili Peppers figured out the marketing side of it.
Yeah.
And because there's really very little difference as when they were both pure bands, they both grew in their own direction, but one of these is a stadium filling band, and the other one, and I love Fishbone, but they need help to fill an amphitheater,
Yep, for sure. And everyone listening, I guarantee I'd be willing to bet that most people are like, they've heard of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but only a handful of people listening would know Fishbone or be able to name a song of theirs.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing that people, that oftentimes the people who are doing the revolutionary work aren't recognized. In the moment in their lifetime. Sometimes, like Kafka died. Like Kafka and I'm sorry to keep coming back to Kafka, but I just find him such a fascinating story. Like on his deathbed, he asked his best friend to burn everything he had written.
Burn it all. Fuck him. Yeah.
And the guy was like, I will. And then Kafka died, and thankfully the guy didn't do it, and then got it all published. But yeah, Kafka had no idea that he would ever be heard. He died not knowing, and somehow had the fortitude to just keep grinding, or whatever the demon was inside him that made him keep going. And he did it.
There are two authors that I want to bring up that are on point with this, and I guess the first we had a guy named Dorian Linsky on the show, and Dorian he's over in Great Britain, and he writes really, really good books, and he just wrote basically a biography of 1984, the book by George Orwell.
Okay.
And it's about George Orwell. And one of the things you realize is that everybody claims Orwell. He gets quoted every day. And Voltaire might get quoted, but you don't know what's Voltaire you're saying. But Orwell constantly on every side of the problem. Everybody,
right. And completely misconstruing what Orwell meant or said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I learned so much by reading Dorian's book, because I read because it was like as he evolved as this writer to get to 1984, his thoughts progressed, and he went from this one thing. And so if you think you understand him, you'd better do some more reading, but he crushed it. He crushed it so that he's still a best-selling author today. I mean, constant. And that's remarkable. And I bet he would be blown away, because he struggled like any author. He struggled to figure out his voice, but boy, when he got there, he gathered people like by the bazillions now at this point,
1984 and Animal Farm are just two massively prescient, important works, but they're not a lot of fun to read. Like they're they're serious books with serious points to make, and not necessarily popular points all the time.
Yeah, and they're combative points. The other guy I wanted to bring up is someone like Peter Drucker, who wrote on the business side of things, right? And he's like, I'm just going to keep writing books and being a professor, and I'm going to learn about business, but I'm going to learn out loud. So when I say something in 1968 and be like, I was absolutely wrong about that. But if you read that 1968 book and you're like, this is the Bible, you realize that your teacher evolved past you. So if you don't go to the body of work, Thomas Sowell's body of work, good God, if you go through that, you're going to come out smarter, but you're also going to learn like he learned. And there's very few people that consume an entire body of intelligent work like that and are able to process it, because, someone like Peter Drucker is just a genius. And he was a genius not only because he had the thoughts, but he could communicate them in a mass way that we all could kind of get.
Well, I think that's the trick, is being able to do both of those things. So oftentimes I remember in college being flummoxed by this, by being assigned a writer, and the ideas were brilliant, and the writing was impenetrable. And just you're like, I can't, like, I want to understand this, but you can't communicate. You are not communicating this in a way that I can absorb it. So it's when you have the two at the same time that you really have a force, but they are rare.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about your work a little bit.
Now, let's segue from George Orwell to Matthew FitzSimmons. That seems like a fair and just comparison.
No, but this is the thing. So let's kind of go back a few minutes in the conversation. And you're a novelist. You tell people, I write thrillers. And the only time we ever see these people, because to your point, writers like that they aren't famous, is when someone's writing an adorable like rom-com, like, oh, I'm a novelist and I live in New York and I'm troubled or whatever. And that's the only thing we know about them. So what is it like to be a successful novelist who writes things that people buy? What's it like to be you? Like, help us understand what the movie version of you would look like. Like if we really saw the real novelist. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I always try and describe the difference between writing my first book and writing my second book. So I wrote my first book. I was at the time I was a high school teacher. I was teaching high school English in Washington, D.C. And I, for various reasons, decided to try and write a book. And I didn't tell anyone about it. And it took me 2.5 years. And when I got done, I got very fortunate. I found an agent, and my agent did an amazing job and sold the book, and I got a book contract. And the book was called The Short Drop, and it came out and it did, I was a little bit of a home run out of the gate. Like my first book did very, very well, and sort of it gave me opportunities that I'm very fortunate to have. But then this interesting thing happens is that when you're writing your first book, I didn't tell anybody, so no one cared, and no one cared is a tremendously freeing concept. I don't mean that in like no one cared about what I was doing. I was like, oh, thank God no one cared, because if you didn't feel like doing it that day, no one cares, and if it's not going to be done for another 6 months, no one cares.
Yeah.
So I sold it. And they're like, this is great. And they gave me I got a 2-book contract. And they said, this is great. This is going to come out at this time. Now, your second book, we're going to need that in 11 months. Go.
What?
And I went, what? And they're like, yeah. To build on the success of the first, we need the next one in 11 months. I said, well, so I stopped teaching and I became a full-time writer. And I had to learn. I mean, so you asked me what the life of a novelist is. Particularly, it's different for what So a guy like Kazuo Ishiguro, the Nobel Prize-winning English author, he writes a book every 6 years, thereabouts. Like he takes his time, and his books come out, and like for me, I've read everything he's ever written. Like and you can tell that craft and that work and that time that went into it. For I'm still relatively new. I've written 6, but this is my 6th book in 6 years, and when you're trying to establish yourself, it's a little bit of a grind. Like you're finishing one, and you're almost immediately starting the next, almost while you're sort of in the edits phase for one, and you're starting to work on that next one to get a jump start. So it was, I don't think I took a vacation for 5 years.
Yeah.
And at some point I was working 6 a.m. until 5 p.m. Sometimes 6, sometimes 7 days a week. And at some point I realized that I wasn't doing myself any favors with that schedule.
Right.
And that there's a value to time away. And so I've actually sort of it's been this like learning to be a professional writer. Like I was like, I got it without really knowing how to do it.
Yeah.
Like writing a book for yourself and writing a book on deadline are 2 different animals. So my life is, I'm trying to get better about, the fabled American work-life balance, but I struggle and I have anxiety if I'm not working, and like get back to that keyboard as soon as possible. And, But life is good. Like it is a dream. It's what I wanted, and I'm so it's really nice to get up in the morning and be like, this is what I want to be doing with my life and my time, and have the privilege and to have the good fortune to be able to do it is just spectacular.
Yeah, I agree. I'm in a similar place where I love what I do. I'm like, I can't wait to talk to this dude today. And it's
Right.
you, it's the next person. And then to find out these other gems talking about the Velvet Underground instead of like, and then in Constance, what happened? Like, well, yeah, for sure. We're going to talk about the book and everything, but I think it's much more fascinating for me as I get up to do my work is to like give the guest and give the audience something that they're not going to get on the next episode with, they see like, I want them to go, I don't know anything about Matthew. I'm going to have to watch an actual show that actually talked about his life, everything. I want that to be the case because I want this to be a unique experience. And it's wonderful to be able to create these things with people.
And the trick is, and just to say, is like you're good at it, kissing up to my host, but that how much work it takes. I watch, having done, I've never been on television in that way, but like doing podcasts and being on people's shows, like I have so much respect for people who can go on a talk show and look like they've known Jimmy Fallon for 30 years and they're best friends, and just just have that instantaneous, like natural, like we're just going to chat in front of a studio audience and millions of people, like we're just sitting in our living room, is an art form and requires a huge amount of work and preparation and skill to make it look like anything. It takes all that work to make it look easy to shoot a free throw. Right? Like by the time you actually see Michael Jordan, like in a game, he spent 30,000 hours in the gym practicing, but it looks like he's just born great at basketball. He wasn't. He worked his ass off to be great at basketball.
This is right. Like, so to do what you do, you have to figure it out. And part of that, and this is the next level of figuring it out, right? Like I was going to ask you, are you an iron butt guy? Are you, I go away for 2 weeks and get started? There's all kinds of approaches that everybody's discovered, but we all have to discover our approach. Like finding your voice writing, sure, but finding your working voice as to what works for you. And to know that, I am going to hit this mark, but first I got to freak out, and then figure out how to not freak out so I can find the elegant way to do that. I mean, that's been a theme for a lot of the authors that we talked to. Are like, yeah, and then I figured it out. I know what it takes. And there's guys like, I work 4 hours a day and then the well goes dry. It'll refill overnight, but I work 4 hours a day. And it's not that they're not working. It's that by not working, they're allowing the well to fill.
Well, there's a great old writer's joke is, what's the hardest thing about being a writer? Is convincing your spouse that sitting on the couch doing nothing is work.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of like, I'm now like so here's how I work. If I can't figure something out, I go and I lie in bed and I put a pillow over my face and I will lie there and think, and it looks to all the world like I'm sleeping, but I am actually like, I put the pillow over my eyes. This is more information than anybody needs, but I lie flat on my back. I put a pillow over my eyes so I can't see anything. And then I try and think through my problem. But convincing anyone that that's my job, good luck with that, because that's a tall order. Because it looks like I'm just taking a rest time.
Yeah, I mean, because what you're not is a guy wearing some, Tony trousers and a loose knit wool sweater, walking around DC's cafes, kind of thing. Right. Like, there's a time where you're like, if anybody saw me right now doing this, I always say, so I used to be a spy, right? And so when I would be out in Afghanistan running around, I would say, if you saw me working, you would swear Pete's just fucking off having a conversation. But that's me working. There's a design in what I do, and it's like watching Willie Nelson play the guitar. You cannot play the guitar like Willie Nelson can. You won't be as good as him at it. He's just so wonderful. But it looks like the easiest thing in the world when he does it. And that's sort of the thing. And sometimes it looks insane, like putting a pillow over your face. Or how many times have I gone and worked out to purposely not think about my problem that I'm in Afghanistan, or taken a really hot shower and just like got out of my head. And then I'm like, oh, I have the answer. And then I go back and I can write down this report, and I will have put the pieces together by purposely not putting them together. And I know all these things make sense to you because we have to sort these things out too. Like, what do I do when I'm stuck? You go put a pillow on your face.
It's like one of the things I always had to tell. It was one of those lessons I tried to impart to when I was a high school teacher. Was you look out at adults, they who were successful, and very rarely do people want to talk about how hard they had to work for what they had. They want it to sound like, well, it was just a foregone conclusion that I'm unbelievably talented, and it's like the whole like never let them see you sweat.
Mm-hmm.
And convincing kids that it wasn't just going to come easily, that they were going to have to sweat, and that it was good and valuable and essential. And I always use the Michael Jordan example. When you heard people talking about Michael Jordan back in the 80s, it was always couched kind of insultingly as he was just better than everyone else. He was more talented and he was more athletic and yada, yada, yada. But frankly, there are a million guys. There are guys who come into the NBA every year who are just as athletic as Michael Jordan, who are just as tall as Michael Jordan. But Michael Jordan worked and had a mindset, and like he watching that like 10-part like The Last Dance, like you saw like that man was driven. He didn't just like show up on the first day and was like, I'm great at basketball. That man worked. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that fact because we like this idea of just like the effortless success, the effortless talent, the effort. We don't want to see how the sausage gets made. We don't want to see the guy with the pillow over their eyes. We just want to see them getting the best actor Oscar, and like that's it. Like there was no work to that. That was just effortless.
Well, and anybody who's that peaky in their brilliance and they've worked to get there, because the guy who is just as brilliant, I get Darryl Strawberry. If Darryl Strawberry wasn't riddled with addiction and all his demons, he might have been able to work at really being the player that we thought he might be. We're going to talk to a guy that did a whole documentary, a 30 for 30 on the Mets, and I'm going to ask a little bit about that because, you look at the guy that just simply outworks the super gifted guy, especially in baseball. It's just like tools are great, but can you put those tools to work even when they're hurt, even when, and there's something to that, especially on the creative side, like with what you're doing and trying to create this. I'm curious, you live in DC, which is, I think, a great place for a writer to live who writes thrillers, because you can always hit a thriller in DC and must meet fantastic potential characters where you're like, oh my gosh, like in your first book, you've got a Marine in there who's also a hacker. You probably really met that person in a bar somewhere and you're like, oh yeah, this solves this problem. I remember I met this guy, I got the pillow on my face. Like, don't forget, you met that guy, Jeff, and he's a hacker. He's a Marine. All right, that's my guy. And then now I know his story. That must happen for you all the time where you're just cataloging human experience as you go through the DC world.
Well, DC is a remarkable resource just because it's kind of a unique city that there is probably an expert on every subject somewhere, between the diplomatic community, between the intelligence community, between there's probably between the governmental side, the nonprofit world, which is the nonprofit lobbyist, the lobbying firm that is lobbying on behalf of the whales or what have you. Like there's an expert on anything here. And on my fourth book, there was a subplot about human trafficking, and it was literally one phone call. I called someone, who was like, "Hey, do you know anybody who works in and around human trafficking?" And in 30 minutes, I was talking to a woman who worked at a nonprofit that was sort of like lobbying and trying to influence policy in terms of how we approach human trafficking. And I was like, "Hey, can I buy you a drink for dinner and just ask you questions?" And it's amazing how generous people are with their time. Gibson Vaughn, the hacker, that whole series, I really wanted to. One of the goals of it was I had never seen hacking in computers portrayed realistically. It was always kind of, the swordfish, hack this bank in 60 seconds while we've got a gun to your head sort of nonsense. And hacking is a very slow, very patient, very time-consuming activity. and I had never seen it portrayed in any way that was real. And I was like, I want to do that. And I've got a friend who is a defense contractor and does inside security threat for someone here in town, and he's been advising me for 6 years on it, and he makes me so much smarter, or sound smarter. I'm a relatively dumb guy, but if you talk to the guys who know, they will make you sound, they won't help your book sound real and give it that grounding in reality. So yeah, no, DC is just a brilliant resource.
One of the things I wanted to be when I grew up, when I was a baby spy, was I would meet these special forces guys, and they were so powered by the ground truth, and that really drove me to where I was at. Like, this is what really matters. Like, we would have these big strategic conversations and operations, and then there would be this guy just in the back row spitting his chew into his can. And he'd say, we're gonna teach 1 million girls English this year in Afghanistan. How exactly are you gonna do that? And they're like, well, we're gonna build schools. And he could say the same thing, be like, didn't we already build 1,000 schools? Damn it. And like, these guys that they're just steeped in the truth, they make such great characters. And those guys, they're contractors. And contractors are not mercenaries for the most part. We get this sense of this. And so when you allow these people to be incredible, they can blow you away with their reality. And I think that they make great character, even if the character just flies in for a moment to make their point and then they disappear from the story forever. That's got to just be so powerful for you to be able to inject truth into these stories.
For sure. No, without question. It's that interesting thing. It's like, do you have to have done the thing in order to write the thing?
Yeah.
Like, do you have to have been a Secret Service agent to write a Secret Service character? Because there is sort of a whole sort of, set of writers who, former district attorney writes legal thrillers, former cop writes, cop thrillers, former special forces soldier writes, and there is that sort of sense that one-to-one, like, they write the thing, therefore that book will be whatever word you want to apply to it. I don't have that luxury. I have to, maybe this is just pragmatic and like personal, but I subscribe to the idea that that a writer can get to the truth without having a first-hand experience of the thing, through observation, through hard work, and that but there are people for whom, like, well, no, I want the real deal. I want to know. That's why they spent so long, like, sort of like pumping Tom Clancy up, that he was this like James Bondian level, like, spy, or like the sort of like the manufactured backstory about who Tom Clancy was to match. But Tom Clancy was just a guy who just read, like, he wasn't. There's a great example of someone who, like, you would have thought that guy had every security clearance in the world and was like, but no, he just took unclassified documents and he did the work and he read and he then put it into a book, and it sounds like, and it is, you believe it because he did the work.
This is such an important point. And I've had a lot of veteran military thriller writers on there, because one, I want to support those guys, and two, there is an authenticity that they can bring. But you're right. Tom Clancy is a great example where I don't think a military or a CIA type intelligence gatherer could have told those stories. One, they'd be too siloed in terms of what they could do. They would be terrified to release secrets. Tom was in court all the time. Like, he's like, by the way, page 15 of Jane's 1978, like, you guys wrote this. This is open source. And then they always wanted to get him for violating. He's like, no, this stuff is out there. And a military person would struggle to get that done. Another guy that comes to mind immediately when you say this, where they had the alternate skill that allowed them to really define the genre in a way that everybody follows their plan, is Stephen J. Cannell. He was never a cop. He was never a detective but you want to write a thriller, especially a cop thriller, it's set in Southern California, you'd better be knowledgeable in his work, because he's set the standard,
Right. Or, a great example of that is David Simon, who was a journalist and did The Wire, and then did Treme, and he's did a great job on Generation Kill.
Yeah, okay.
Like Generation Kill, I think is one of the best portrayals of like an active duty, like in country unit, and David Simon has no military experience. I don't know whether he has military experience, but his career was not in the military. But he has a great ear and eye for whether it's the cops and the drug gangs of Baltimore, or it's New Orleans. Like he has a great eye for observing culture and portraying culture. Tom Wolfe was another one who was good at that. De Tocqueville, maybe the greatest observer of America. I mean, if you ever read de Tocqueville stuff, it still is unbelievably like on point about America and what it is to be American. And he was a French aristocrat, but he went in and he did the work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love this. This part of the conversation is great because you can bring an alternate perspective to how that truth is and do it from this, only really do it from that outside perspective. I love that. The another guy I'm thinking about is David Ignatius. He's a writer in DC, and normally he writes like his beat. This is for people but his beat is basically international politics, primarily the Middle East, or whatever. And then every now and then he's like, and I want to write a novel. You think about his knowledge. He's not a spy, he's not an operator, but he knows how these black programs in essence work, what happens, how the senator is going to cover his and then all the intrigue is built in. And that's got to be the same thing for you. I mean, you were around this stuff. You understand, so a friend of mine, Kat Connor, writes fantastic. She's from New Zealand. She writes fantastic, like FBI-based thrillers, right? And she is so good at being just ahead of reality, that when reality happens, you're like, how did you know this?
How did you know that?
Yeah. And this has got to be right up your alley. I mean, this has to be exactly, because you're talking about hacking and quantum computers, all these different things in your books. You must be like, I predicted the future. I mean, every book.
Yeah, it is. I do like that sort of speculative fiction world where you're, I like science fiction, but I've never felt particularly attached to books that were set 200 years in the future, 300 years in the future, in a galaxy far, far away. I mean, I love Star Wars, but like, I don't, that's just sort of a childhood attachment. The books that I've always liked are the ones like a George Orwell, like a Handmaid's Tale, like the works of Philip K. Dick or William Gibson. These people who are like just looking just ahead of the curve, just over the horizon, or taking, George Orwell basically took, a very familiar world and just twisted it just enough so that it still looks like a world that but some things about it that like you were uneasy about, those he brings into sharp relief. And now all of a sudden you feel a great sense of discomfort. And that's a tremendous skill. Whether you're predicting the future or whether you're just sort of, feeling your way, what's it going to be like 10 years from now?
Yeah.
But, with what's going on, where are we in 10 years?
Look at this. This compliment from my buddy Brad. He said that if you read my dispatches from my road trip, there's some echoes of de Tocqueville in there, if not quite PJO work. How about that? Yeah,
that's
awesome. I love that. Thanks, Brad. Put a big smile on my face. So this book here, Constance, is not a Gibson Vaughn book. Is that correct?
That is correct. It is a spec fiction novel set in 2040 in Washington, D.C.
Which is not that far ahead.
Not that far ahead. That's about as far as I felt safe doing it. I didn't feel like I had the, I think any further than, frankly, trying to predict what's going to happen in, if you had told me and asked me in 2012 to predict what was going to happen between 2016 and 2020, I would not have been, on target in any way, shape, or form. I mean, there's so many variables. and things can go so many different ways. We live in a complex moving system. It's like trying to predict where a hurricane is going to go. And sometimes you're right, but you got like a range, and that hurricane is going to hit somewhere in that range. The next 10 years are going to do the same thing. It's going to be there are a lot of factors. There's the unknown. Without 9/11, you think about George Bush. Like, George Bush gets elected.
Yeah,
he gets elected on a platform of essentially no nation building. Like, that's something he ran on, and he had a whole agenda. And 6 months in, 2 planes hit the World Trade Center, and pretty much his entire agenda went in the trash.
Yeah.
There was no predicting, what George Bush's presidency was going to look like, because the complexity of the world. So you make your predictions, but you do it with a big grain of salt, because chances are something is going to come along to just take us off in a new direction.
This is interesting. So we're all up in a lather because Joe Biden is I guess for a lot of people in this country, tens of millions of people, they're looking at him going, is this the right guy? Is he capable of doing it? And then we're mad at him. But then we jump back to George Bush and we get mad at George Bush. But the reality is the number of people sitting in that kid's classroom who were president, who would have made the right call, is probably zero. Like, what are you supposed to do if you're George Bush on 9/10 and 9/12? Like, totally different worlds. And I agree. He ran, and I remember him saying, I'm the only guy on this stage with executive experience, when he was trying to be the Republican candidate. And he's right. And he's running a big state and running it well. And he's like, I know how to cross the aisle. We're like, yeah, all right. You know what? That's pretty good. The other guy said, hey, let's not run on reform. Let's run on the same thing. And then George Bush kind of said, I'm going to run on the same thing too. Like, let's just keep status quo. We're going to sprinkle in some education stuff. And then goodbye. Now you have to invent something. We didn't even know what a Shiite, Shia, Sunni. We didn't know what that even was. We just knew we didn't like it. And now that we had a problem. And we also, I think some of us expected this problem, right? And so what if Al Gore was sitting in that classroom? Would he have done a better job? What if he had the answers? I mean, you have to say, no way. I mean, I wouldn't have. I don't know if you would have, but
I don't know if there is one. I don't think there's a right answer.
Right.
The other thing that I feel really bad for modern politicians, and I feel bad for them for the following reason. And I always use the example of the Revolutionary War. Okay, so 240 years ago, wherever we're at, the Americans decide that they are done with the British. So they write a letter, and I'm paraphrasing. This is not historically accurate. I'm just for point of demonstration. They write a letter.
History, yeah.
They write a letter. Hey, King George, we're out. Love America. And they put it on a ship, and the ship sails 3 months across the Atlantic, lands in Portsmouth. Someone has to carry that letter to wherever the king is. The king has to look at it and go, all right, what are we going to do about this? And then they have a conversation. Meanwhile, America's been busy for months. And King George writes back, no, you're not out. You belong to us. Writes it, walk it to Portsmouth, put it on a ship, and go back another 3 months. So now we've gone 8 months between two events.
Right.
There was a slowness. There was a pace. You could take time to deliberate. You could think things through. Now jump forward to 9/11, jump forward to the last days of our occupation of Afghanistan. Whatever you want. Now, as a politician, as a leader, you have nanoseconds to make that same decision. You don't have 8 months. You have to, when England decided that they were going to hold America, they had to take time to plan it, to move troops around. We can put troops anywhere in the world in 12 hours.
Right.
If we want to. The pace at which you have to make a decision and take all of that information and listen to all your advisors, listen to the news, listen to the media, and block it all out and say, this is what we're going to do. Oh, and also we're going to have a hurricane and we're going to have a pandemic and we're going to have this. And then you have to figure out all of that at the same time. And you need to make all those decisions correctly or we're going to eat your lunch. I mean, anyone who wants to be president of the United States is out of their minds. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States, I don't want you to be president of the United States because that concerns me. That is a sign that you are, there's something very wrong with you. If you want to be in that position, I can't even, no, thank you very much. That sounds like an awful no-win. God, just what a terrible job.
And probably 100 million people despise you, and no matter what you do, you could say, you know what, I like chocolate and vanilla, and you would be the vilest, most evilest, idiotic person in the world for the most mundane thing. And so if you were good or qualified to be able to, fail less than the next person at that job, because it'll be really hard to succeed. And really, you don't control so many factors. George Bush didn't control someone flying in an airplane, and it completely redefined foreign policy for forever going forward. I promise that Barack Obama did not want to follow the Bush doctrine, but he's like, oh crap.
Right.
I'm sort of bound to this thing because what am I going to do? It's so, yeah.
I mean, to an extent you have like the American economy, I always likened it to, like America is a huge elephant, not from a political standpoint, but just an elephant. And the president is an ant on the back of the elephant. And when he gets on board the elephant's already running.
Yeah.
And the ant has a stick, and the ant can sort of do one of these, and the elephant is gonna maybe pay attention. But again, it's just, that is an awful and thankless job.
It is. It's so bad.
It's just so bad. I mean,
you think about this. So Joe Biden has all this stuff going on. Half the nation hates him. There's talk about impeachment, a lot of things, serious things that require his attention, or his staff's attention. And then Texas, it puts this law in with this heartbeat law. And I'm not commenting on the law, but tens of millions of people are saying, well, what's Joe Biden going to do about this? Like, how's he going to, he's not the king. He's not the king. Like he may be able to write something for a few minutes, but the Supreme Court has already said this is not the way to approach this within our system. So do it another way. And if you write that, someone's going to walk into the Supreme Court and they're going to say the same thing. And so, like, honestly, like, what can he do about this? We've got to deal with it. But it's really Texas's problem, And so now we've got it. Anyhow, blah 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 blah, yakety yakety. But
it is interesting how I always hear I live in the District of Columbia, so. And we do not get senators, and we do not get I am taxed without representation. Yes. But I often hear people when I travel say things like, "Oh, well, Washington is broken and it's so corrupt." And I say to them, "It's like, well, you elected the people here. It's like Washington's not manufacturing people. You sent them. Mm-hmm. You elected them. So if it's corrupt." Yeah. Go look in the mirror.
Yeah,
Washington is about as good as the people that you choose to send here.
Absolutely. I mean, we often hear like term limits. Vote your guy out. Well, what? No, not my guy.
Not my guy.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just hashtag vote out all incumbents. We don't like it. Congress is rated so lowly, lower than the president has been, and this has been true for a long time. Vote them out. Vote them out. Give someone else a shot. You want to make a change. Hey, the legislature's the one that's supposed to be doing most of the stuff the president is doing anyhow. So why aren't these guys figuring out how to get along? Anyhow, let's wrap up talking about Constance for a few minutes again.
Okay, deal.
We are trying to sell some books here.
Books, schmucks.
Whatever. Yeah. But I think it is important to have these interesting conversations, because it does open our minds to like, who we're going to be reading. And one of the things I love to read older writers that are past, like, you're reading the best words they had in that moment on, in that time. So in the context of the time, their best effort, and they probably would be like, you know what? There's like 15 sentences in that book that I would love to change. And now that I've been dead for 100 years, I would change about half of the book. Right. And so when you read it with that kind of mind, how much does that go into you and what you're doing? I mean, can you be that precious with your words, or do you just got to kind of push this stuff out? I mean, how much does the quality of what you hear in your head and what gets on the paper, how much does that matter to you?
It matters an enormous amount to me. And I saw an interview with Mick Jagger years ago, and the interviewer said, "Hey, do you, if Tumbling Dice comes on, your limo, is that cool? You're like turned up?" He's like, "No. I make them turn that off right away." He's like, "Really? Why?" He's like, "Oh, I can't stand listening to Rolling Stones songs." And the interviewer's like, "Really? You don't like?" He's like, "No, because I'm a much better musician now, and I can hear all the things that we did wrong, and I can't do anything about it. Like I see all the mistakes. I see the places where we could have produced that better, and I can't fix it. So I can't so there's a. I mean, I don't mean to speak for the entire writing community, but my guess is that there's a point at which something just has to be done.
Yeah.
Whether it be a film, whether it be anything, there's a point at which there's a diminishing returns from, can I improve this? But there are always improvements to make, and I'm sure if I went back to my first book, I would do a lot of things very differently. I'm sure if I went to my last book, I'm sure if I started reading Constance, actually I did a reading of Constance the other day, and I'm changing words as I go in my head, and I read it differently than it was on the page. Like I fixed it on the fly, which I don't know if that's a good idea, but my brain was like, "Oh no, this would be better." And it's just, it's a rabbit hole. It's a dangerous rabbit hole. But yeah, no, the quality of the words, it to me is incredibly important. But there's also at some point I have to be done,
right?
And I have to accept that I have finite time and finite resources, and this is as good as it's going to be given those other factors. Which is a tough thing at some point and then to release it into the world, and for people to be like, "This thing should have been better," and you're like, I know.
So true. I wrote a recent op-ed thing about Robert Gates wrote a thing in the New York Times saying like why we should stay in Afghanistan. This was in July, and I'm like, look, and I missed the point. Like I thought I had wrote it in a way that it was understandable, but people read that as we need to leave, and I'm like, no, we haven't earned the right to stay because we didn't do our job on the ground in a way that is professional. We ran it half-assed, and I can say that because I was on the ground, but that didn't come across. What came across is Pete thinks we should leave no matter what, and completely leave, and that wasn't and so I'm like, damn it. I wrote this thing. I spent a lot of time writing, and when I read it, and I'm like, I absolutely can read it in that vein. And I guess this is like the thing I think about, like, what would F. Scott Fitzgerald have said if he could say what he actually wanted to say? Like when you can sit down and really explain your book, because a book is linear, and like you said, you're on a timeline. And at some point, you're like, it's done. This is as done as it gets. That's how the show is for me. I'm not going to go back and fix stuff that it just doesn't matter. Like there's new things to work on, but you have to keep that in mind that Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote the best book that she could write when she wrote that book, based upon an old memory and everything else. And so it's not supposed to be perfect. It's not supposed to be canon. It's supposed
a good way to look at it. Yeah.
The way they're at. Yeah. Yeah. So is Constance canon? Is it perfect now?
I'm going to say yes, because short of it becoming a movie where I can, and that I had some influence in, pushing it, making adjustments. This is the book that it is.
Tell us why we need to read this book.
I think it's an original idea. It came from, it came from the premise. I was just monkeying around with the idea of a traditional murder mystery detective novel, and I posed the question: how could I get someone to investigate their own murder? How could someone be both detective and victim at the same time? Because obviously you can't, unless you're Patrick Swayze in Ghost. There's really no way, unless there's a supernatural element, you can't investigate your own murder.
Right.
And then the cloning piece came to me, and it started. And well, what if it was a clone of someone who'd been murdered who's now investigating her own murder while nefarious forces are threatening her? and then I was off to the races. And so basically the premise of the book is that there's a company in 2040 that offers a cloning service that will upload a record of your consciousness and store it and make a clone of you and age it so it's exactly the same age as you, and then hold both of those things in storage. And then should something unfortunate happen to Matthew FitzSimmons and he dies, the consciousness would be downloaded into the clone and Matthew FitzSimmons would carry on. And I said it in 2040, and so I think that's a fun story. I think you should read it because it's a fun mystery told in a way that I hadn't seen done before. But then once I got into the weeds of it, and I said it in 2040, and it's just around the corner, and I really liked this idea that a technology gets introduced, that the technology gets introduced without society and culture's permission.
Yeah.
Like my grandmother was born in 1921 and she died in 1999. In 1935, they passed the Rural Electrification Act, which, because at the time in 1935, only 2% of American farms had electricity. 2%.
Let's think about that.
That was crazy. 1935. So that was when she was 14 years old.
Yeah.
For the remainder of her life, we see the rise of the automobile, the rise of the highway. She got on her first airplane when she was 30-something years old. Like, she was born into a world where, like, air travel was not a thing. And by the time she died, she flew to Europe. She saw the atomic bomb. She saw the computer, the cell phone. I mean, it was like the assumptions about what her life was going to be and where her life ended. It was just mind-boggling, like the journey and the number of things she had to absorb. But no one asked for the atomic bomb. Like, we both grew up with the realities of what the atomic bomb could do. No one asked. Like, it was a small group of people, like, we're going to make this thing, and now everyone else is going to have to live with it. Yeah. And sometimes that's for the better, and sometimes it's not. But there's not really a lot of forethought about, is a technology, what are the unforeseen consequences of introducing this technology? And so cloning was a really fun way, or an interesting thought experiment. Like, if you introduce cloning to America, how would people react to that? How would we react legally? How do we act socially? How do we act culturally? Would it be accepted? What if it was only available to the 1%? What if only the very, very rich could have clones and the rest of us were just out of luck? How would we react to that? So I think it's a really fun story, but it allowed me to pose. It was a lot of fun to build that world and to sort of look at what those consequences and sort of try and predict how America would react, how the world would react to that. And some of it's good and some of it's bad and some of it's very hostile. And, it was a fun hypothetical. So,
yeah. Oh man, this is great. I love having this conversation. I want to have you back every time you have a book out or you want to talk about something, because it's just,
I'd love it.
A lot of knowledge in your head. One of the and I love the thing about your grandma. I love these things where we look at time and you're like, wait, what? Like, I like to say, okay, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Wyatt Earp, and Cochise were all alive at the same time. Dramatically different existences. And two of them are neighbors. I mean, it's just incredible, like, how we deal with these things, and it's neat. The other thing is, and I believe this is still true to this day. If not, only a couple months ago did it change. President John Tyler, who was Tippecanoe Tyler too. So his guy is like before. He's antebellum president, right? Mm-hmm. He's got grandkids that are still alive, not great grandkids, and so these dudes are obviously in their 90s, but that's the living memory of this nation, and there's been a lot of technological change. It's just remarkable.
I can't, and what's interesting is, like, in our lifetime, I mean, I'm 51. I was born in 1969. Things have actually not changed that much compared to my grandmother. Like, there was this like burst. Like, the first half of the 20th century was just, everything got rewritten. And we spent the second half of the 20th century refining everything that we'd done in the first half. But life is, that was an interesting, like, how different will life be in 2040 than 2020? was a fun game to play.
Yeah.
Because how different is life in 2020 than it was in the year 2000? Like, how would you know if you were walking down the street? How could you tell it was 2020 versus the year 2000?
Yeah.
And
On
it would
this
be-
thing that I have in my hand, you can get in an argument with people anywhere in the world and talk almost in damn near real time and say evil shit to each other as much as you want. Like that's
Yep.
one of the outcomes. That's
Yep.
great outcomes. But you're right. We're basically exactly the same age. I was born January 70. So like we're minutes apart in terms of that.
Yeah.
And we have seen incredible things. But yeah, you look back at those generations past and how in the world do they even process it? I mean, literally, Laura Ingalls Wilder is a great example. She grows up in a dugout on the side of no one moves into the side of a riverbank anymore. Like that's not even a thing. And then in her lifetime, there's a satellite in space.
Yeah.
Insane. Yeah. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you much longer. Everybody should buy Constance. I know I'm going to do it. I'm going to get it. I can't wait to read it. And then let's have you come back on all the time because it's just great to talk to you, man. I really
anytime you got a gap in your schedule, just shoot me an email. I'm in.
Perfect. All right, stand by for 1 second. Let me run this roll here.